Welcome to the Pronoia podcast, where we explore healing in personal, family, and professional relationships through the lens of the universe having our back. I'm your host, Bernadette, midwife, core and pelvic floor trainer, somatic and systemic therapist, and founder of Core and Floor Restore, Reconnected Birthing, and My Bleeding Days, spaces designed to help people reconnect to themselves and ultimately their own power and trust. And I'm joined by my bestie, Jess Weatherall, an osteopath passionate about trauma-informed, nervous system aware, biodynamic and cranial osteopathy. Together, we share a deep reverence for the body's wisdom and a fascination with its extraordinary capacity to heal. Through our work and lived experience, we've come to understand how the physiological, emotional, and spiritual aspects of trauma are woven together and how that interconnectedness holds the key to something profound. We hope today's episode sparks something within you. So without further ado, let's get it started in here. Welcome to episode 3 of the Pronoia podcast, and happy International Midwives Day if you are listening to this on Tuesday, the 5th of May. If you're listening to it in the future and you're a midwife, we hope you celebrated. Today is one of my favorite days of the year. It was also my pop's birthday, which I find really special. Yeah, he was my favorite human from my childhood, and knowing that he was born on International Midwives Day and I became a midwife, just the interconnectedness in that is pretty special.
Yeah, that's awesome. So nice.
Today, we are going to start a discussion around the maternity care system, and I anticipate that this discussion will expand over multiple sessions as it is very multi-layered and complex. And I also want to add that I'm not going to be able to cover it all. It's just almost like a taster in these discussions. But I thought, given today is International Midwives Day, it'd be a really great opportunity to start to have these discussions. And the theme of this year's International Midwives Day, set by the International Confederation of Midwives, is 1 million more midwives. And so this is a global campaign. This theme stems from a global campaign and petition to address the urgent shortage of nearly 1 million midwives worldwide, and a gap that directly impacts maternal and newborn health outcomes. And I would say the health of the whole world. And I'd say that with a lot of confidence.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yes.
As an osteopath, you treating people, you see how birth impacts people for their whole lives. And I don't think as a culture we really understand the impact of it. Birth is so often pushed to the side because in our lifespan, it can be condensed to just a day or a couple of days event. And so it's often not given the attention that it really deserves, because it has such a huge impact on who we are and how we carry out our lives and how we interact with everybody. So I got really teary in my body just even saying that we are nearly 1 million midwives short. It brings up so much in me. And I have worked in international development, I've worked in Aboriginal communities, and I've worked in busy hospitals, and you feel the extent of that shortage I've felt the extent of that shortage in all of the places. But I think the other thing that's really important to comment on here, and obviously there's always a theme with in any international day, and one theme can't cover all the issues. So I really respect that. But I also, when looking at this theme, want to zoom out a little bit and start the discussion on, well, what if we do get 1 million more midwives? What are they coming into? And who are they being mentored by, and what does the system look like that's receiving them, and then who do they become because of that? Because if we rewind a little bit, and that's really what this theme needs us to do, if we rewind a little bit and look at the current state of the midwifery workforce, and yes, today's International Midwives Day, but I'm going to really be talking about maternity. So when I talk about maternity, I'm not just talking about midwives. I'm talking about worldwide. We have labour and delivery nurses, as they're often called in some countries, doulas, obstetricians, and other professionals that work in maternity space, because we are all together in providing this care, and often we're not, and that's going to be a key thread that I talk about, pipelines. And so the report had 32 recommendations to boost support, improve data, and scale up models of care. And a big part of this, I mean, there's multiple parts, but a big part of it is midwives being able to work to their full scope of practice, and then to be supported to be able to work in a way that also supports the other roles that they have, thinking about that the majority of midwives are mothers, and they have children.
Is that what is meant by scaling up the model of care? What does that term mean?
So models of care is how the different ways that midwives can work and the different ways families can receive care. So midwifery group practice, for example, is a model of care. And so if you scale up models of care, you're not really scaling up, you're just allowing for midwives to work to their full scope. The issue is most midwives aren't trained within full scope.
Yes.
So then to scale up models, to then expand them for midwives to do that. And I felt the extent of this when I went from providing publicly funded home birth, where I was working to my full scope, and even within that, it was limited, if I'm honest, to then working in a country hospital where for the first time in my career, 15, 16 years of working clinically, I had to ring a doctor for birth. I lost skills. I de-skilled in that role because I was no longer able, trusted, supported to work within my full scope.
Yeah.
So if we, yes, let's bring the midwives in, but what are we bringing them into, and how are they going to be able to work? And a lot of this ties into one of the biggest aspects of all of this, which is oppression. And midwifery has been stolen. It's the only profession I know that has been stolen. And that, every cell of my body really feels that.
Yeah, I'm feeling that too.
Because the flow and effect of having a profession stolen extends throughout the whole world. It's so big. And not only has our profession been stolen, and I say it with a lot of love and respect and understanding, because if you look historically at what has happened in midwifery and medicine, you can really zoom out and understand it. And I'll touch on parts of it today, but I did a whole webinar on the history of midwifery in Australia and how it came to be this way. But midwifery, along with prostitution, is always argued that they are the oldest professions. We've been around since the beginning of human existence. And it has changed drastically in the last, really since the 1700s, when medicine came in, and really when the role of GPs came in. And so if I touch on it a tiny bit right now, because I've gone there, it's understanding that the comments were that if you were to gain somebody in pregnancy, you gain, and I'm going to use the word patient because that's what medicine uses, it's not what I use, but you gain a patient for life. And so midwives and GPs, this is, talking like late 17, early 1800s in England, and then in Australia for our history. And I really want to pause for a minute here and acknowledge that midwives were here on this land. Aboriginal midwives were here on this land for 60,000 years, and that knowledge is a part of our history as well. in that colonization really pushed that to the side, but it still existed in parts where communities weren't colonized yet. So when I moved to the territory, I learnt that it wasn't until the 1960s that the last Aboriginal communities were really colonized and stopped having the space to live as they always were. So when you look at colonization in Australia, it's really important to understand that it happened at different times because Australia is so big. And so there were, up until the 1960s, places where Aboriginals still had the space and safety to live as they always had. But I really want to acknowledge that that part is a part of our history too that often gets overlooked, of that, just that wisdom. You know, and I've had
it's fascinating to think about when you travel into certain areas in Australia, and there's these women's areas that the Aboriginals have been accessing for exactly these purpose, and to think about the differentiation between something like that to something that we're seeing in hospital settings now, with that control of the medical system, which are often male doctors or obstetricians as well, and just how far something can come from those Indigenous practices to what we're seeing in mainstream medicine approaches now, which is, just listening to you talk, I'd never really thought consciously about that, but just now it's kind of like just seeing that the distance between those two things, and it's how removed that can feel from our natural processes.
And I think, I've had a lot of privileges in my career, and I'm going to talk about at the start of today's, I know we've already started, but I'm going to talk about in today's episode the things that I've experienced that have really led me to be in what I feel is a really unique position in midwifery. But a big part of that was working in Aboriginal communities and having the privilege to be paid to sit and be a part of women's business, to sit and learn about bush medicine, to sit and just hear stories, and have the immense privilege of having that a part of that wisdom shared with me, despite not being Aboriginal myself. And oh gosh, like, it was just so rich. And so, because I have had that along with many other things, I have now this opportunity to see things in such a zoomed out lens. And that's what I would really like to bring to this conversation. I think it's interesting, and I'm going to talk a lot about polarization in these episodes. And polarization is how we have really been conditioned to think. It's how our media works. It's how many of our systems work, including our justice system. But this polarization of this or that, wrong or right. And so often we see things as two options. And really, things rarely exist in that way. They actually exist on this continuum. And so I want to be really clear here that I'm going to make some comments, and some of them are going to feel jarring. Some of them you're going to want to throw away. Some of them you're going to want to accept. But my intention is to not make anything wrong. And that's the paranoia of this. But it was interesting when I typed in IMD, which I've always used for International Midwives Day. What came up this time was International Men's Day. So I typed in IMD to check the theme, because I knew the theme was a 1 million more midwives, but I just wanted to check to make sure I had it right. So I searched it, and up came International Men's Day. And I was like, International Men's Day? What? And so I was just like, wow, what a moment. I'm talking about oppression. I'm talking about how, and it was men in medicine originally. We now have lots of women in medicine, but when the real shifts came between midwifery and medicine, that was a male-dominated profession versus a female-dominated profession. And when we talk about oppression in midwifery, we also need to understand oppression in women. And I think that both of those things really tie into our current situation today and where we're at with a lot of aggression. And I want to talk to that. So the aggression comes from trying to rebalance the system when we've been oppressed. When we've been oppressed, I like to think of everything with a systemic lens. And when I do that, I see everything as a circle. And so if we have experienced oppression, we no longer get to take up much of that circle. And the things that have, the things and the people that have been taken from us take up the rest. And so once we start to have awareness around that, our desire naturally, biologically, systemically, is to start to take up more space. Now that needs to happen. Midwives need to take up more space. Women need to take up more space. And I want to lead some of those conversations on how we can do that in a really sustainable way. So I'm going to talk about today a little bit about my career to help people understand why I now have the lens that I do, because I didn't. For the majority of my career, I've been in a polarized view. I've very much been in wrong versus right. And I can remember being taught by really incredible leaders. And one of them was Professor Caroline Homer, who was my supervisor for my honours degree. She was one of my university lecturers. And I can remember at university, and I have traveled with her overseas and presented at conferences alongside her. And I can remember her talking about often collaboration and how we needed to collaborate more as midwives and obstetricians. And every time she spoke about that, my whole nervous system would constrict and I'd want to repel it and throw it back at her, because I was trained by really passionate, strong, powerful midwives that were sitting more in that trying to rebalance the oppression. And again, not wrong. No one is wrong in this. But if we start off right at the start of my career, I actually got into medicine, which is fascinating now. So I had worked for incredibly rich people in America, and I had watched Meet the Fuckers, and I had watched Madonna in Haiti. And at the time I was studying sports psychology, and I'd watched those two things. And inside of me, I was like, I want to do that, because in Meet the Fuckers, he catches a baby. And I was like, I want to do that there where Madonna was in Haiti. And I think it was my mum, actually, which is really beautiful. That's a really beautiful healing piece for me to kind of just bring a bit more conscious awareness to. But I'm most definite that it was my mother who sent me Hospital by the River, which is Catherine Hamlin's story. And just a quick summary for those that don't know, Catherine Hamlin was a female obstetrician alongside her husband, who was also an obstetrician, that moved to Ethiopia and did a lot of work on fistulas. And so I decided that I was going to do medicine, and I was going to go to Ethiopia, and worked with Catherine Hamlin after I read this book. And the family that I was working for wanted to pay for me to do medicine at NYU, New York University. But I was like, no, I need to get straight A's, so I can't be a carer of 5 children and study medicine. So I moved back to Australia, got in touch with Catherine Hamlin at the time and was like, can I just come and study with you? And she was like, no, get your degree in your country. And gosh, I was mad about that.
I can imagine, yeah.
I was not 21-year-old B was not impressed that Catherine Hamlin didn't want to just take me.
Why aren't you accepting my vision?
Yes, that is so my eldest child as well. Like, no, I've planned it all. Like, I have planned this. And she was like, and I can see now her advice was so sound, but get your degree in your home country. And then come over. And she was all for me coming over, which was really supportive. But get your degree first. So I, did the GAMSAT, got into medicine, but then got really impatient, decided to do midwifery. because I thought it would get me there quicker. I called midwifery at the time midwifery. That's how little I knew about it. And I had come from a mother who had private obstetricians and not elective cesareans, but she had cesareans. And I remember growing up being like, I'm going to have cesareans. Like, why would you even try to have a labor? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. And then I was, I had the likes of Nikki Leap, Pat Brody, Hannah Darlin, Shay Caplice, Marilyn Ferrer. So for those that are midwives, some of you will know them, some of you won't. But they were my guides. They were my teachers in my very first year. And I remember sitting with Hannah Darlin, and she had grown up, and I'm not going to get the country right. It's not there, but she had grown up in, I'm pretty sure it was an African country. And that was where her midwifery journey started. And I remember even on the first day being like, great, I can side with you because I'm going to Africa. So we have something in common. You came from there and I'm going there with this. And this is the only reason I'm here. And so anyway, long story short, I did my midwifery, and it was a really, really hard time. We were the third year through the direct entry of midwifery. The hospital that I started at, there was 5 of us. I was the only one that finished. I moved to another hospital, finished the degree. I moved to another hospital in year 3, and they had never had B-Mid students before. And so they really didn't know what to do with us. So to give people a little bit of a background, and I wanted to say this at the start, is that this talk today, whilst it has a midwifery lens on it, it really applies to all systems and all systemic change. And so, the education system, the justice system, our family systems, whilst you might not be in maternity, you may not have actually turned up to this. I'm probably speaking to the people who aren't listening now, but the conversations that we have around this are really applicable to so many different relationships. So I hope that you're here and able to take some of this away and apply it to your life. But I see so many parallels between especially the education and the midwifery system. And our own family systems too. I really, want to talk about that. Like so much of what I'm going to give, you're going to see like that circle. I apply that circle to my own family. Who's taking up more space? Who's trying to get more space and why? And that systemic lens really can be applied to anything. So if you're here, thank you for being here. And if you're not, hopefully you find it and you've come back to this. But yeah, I then moved to a second hospital, and they were really trying to figure out what to do with us. And so it was a really hard slog.
So can I just clarify what that looked like compared to what they were used to with the midwives coming through that were, so previously midwives had a nursing degree as well. This is the difference. So what was the difference in what you were coming in with and the skills that you had, or what you were or not, or were not able to do compared to what had been happening previous to that?
Yeah, thank you. You're going to keep my brain on track if you can concentrate enough of where I've gone. So if you think about before direct entry midwifery, they had to do nursing. So they were fully qualified nurses. So, and a lot has changed since then, but we were sent into the hospital setting for prac, and we couldn't even make a bed. And that was the first, and that in itself speaks volumes, right? The first skill we learnt at university was how to make a bed.
Yeah.
Now that is in conjunction with nursing. So if we think about, if we really rewind, midwifery was a profession that was job-based, on-the-job training, right? And then nursing came about to support medicine. So nursing has always been in that hierarchy. It's always been in that supporting and helping profession for medicine.
Yeah.
Midwifery has always been its own profession with its own autonomy, its own way of training and guiding. And when that got amalgamated with medicine, it also got amalgamated with nursing. And so for so long, there was a fight to differentiate nurses from midwives and make us our own profession again, because we got swept under nursing. So what that looked like for us is that we didn't have 3 years of nursing experience, which in my opinion was excellent, because midwifery is, in my belief, yes, there are some crossovers, but it is a very different profession. And not
Yeah.
everyone's going to agree with me on that, and that is okay. But true midwifery is a separate profession. Modern midwifery, most of modern midwifery now you would describe as obstetric nursing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because it comes from a place of intellect. So true midwifery is an embodied practice, because birth is. Birth is a body event. So to be met in that, you need to have someone that is able to be in their body too. And so the number one skills of true midwifery are things that are actually, they can be taught. And that is part of what I want to start doing more. But they can be difficult to learn, especially if they aren't modeled. But the biggest skills are awareness, attunement to self, attunement to the person in your care, and then attunement to the relational space between you.
So yeah, so the difference I'm seeing here is like is midwifery versus more of that obstetric nurse role, whereas you're going back to medicine, and then nursing comes in as support to medicine. So there's that potential for midwifery to become more of that role as an obstetric nurse, where instead of having that embodied, attuned connection to what is going on in you, so that you can relate to that in the birthing mother and be aware of what's happening in that relational space, you're actually handing that over to the medical system or that person that is next up in the hierarchy. So we've got the midwife over here, which is in that kind of attuned, supportive, embodied role, versus that obstetric nurse midwife that is taking that potential from within them and putting it outside of them into the system or into another person. It's like very true, very different ways of how that feels to even think about.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what is happening now is true midwifery is really falling into the roles of doulas, because midwives do not have the space. And I'm hearing this more and more in birth debriefs. My midwife was with the computer. So the word midwife means with woman. That's the true definition of it. And right now it's looking like with computer or with policy, to no fault of anybody's. I want to be really clear. Again, this isn't about making things wrong or right. It's about speaking to what is true in the moment, and what modern birth has come to. When I really hear birth debriefs now, I'm like, these poor midwives and obstetricians, they really need PAs to be able to record. And it's going to be interesting to see what AI does in this space. A lot. But in order to be able to have the space to be in your body and for your nervous system to be in that ventral vagal state, which is what is required for oxytocin to flow, for physiological birth to occur, you need those around you to also be in the same state, because we're pack animals. And so if we are constantly in the intellect and we are constantly with policy and with computer, where is our nervous system at? What is it doing? So,
and I think, we were chatting about this the other day, and it's that with Leo's birth, my oldest, and I had a doula there, which when I look back at that, it was an ultimate kind of paranoia moment meeting her, because it came about because I was getting my car serviced on the other side of the city. And I thought, I'm just going to try and find someone to have a massage with while my car's being serviced. And so I just Googled her and found this woman, and the name of her business was Nurtured Birth, and her name is Sarah, and hopefully, she might be listening to one of these episodes, but she's an incredible woman. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
And I showed up to her for this massage, and she was, I think I was about 20 weeks pregnant at the time. And she was like, okay, well, I'm a doula. Have you thought about having a doula at your birth? And then she was like, and you need to contact this person for calm birth classes, which was Lael Stone. And you need to go to these yoga classes for birth preparation, which was just so beautiful as well. So all of these things kind of aligned around having my car serviced on the other side of the city. But she was present there for my birth. And I had a very long labor with Leo. It was about 45 hours of 2 to 3 minute contractions for the whole time. And there was a stalling in there. And I had my osteopath come in and treat me at some point, which helped kind of labor along as well. And we can go into that another time. But during this process, and I was birthing at that point, it was called the Family Birth Centre at the Mercy Hospital, which I think it's called something else now. I don't think that program exists how it was then. And I had some incredible midwives, like this midwife, Rose, her name was. She was just so beautiful and so supportive and just held me in such a beautiful way. But at the same time, even in this birth centre setting, you could feel the presence of this obstetric overlay of these doctors sitting upstairs, watching things on screens and, checking in on heart rates and notes that the midwives were feeding back to them. So even in that process of what essentially was a midwife-led birth environment, that presence was felt of pressure, of obstetric pressure and clock watching and assumptions that things should be going a certain way. And I remember at certain points where, there were suggestions made about inducing or augmenting labour because the positioning was not quite right, and the theory was we'll give some syntocin and bring on some stronger contractions and that'll help baby to turn. And in my body, I'm going, no, we lead to a baby, and that leads to a baby in distress, and we end up in a cesarean there. So, and I'm looking at Sarah, who's there as a doula, and she's just like, well, and the question she would always come back to me is to ask, like, am I okay? And is my baby okay? And she just kept kind of bringing me back into my body around this. But at one point, they're saying, well, she should at least be on a drip for fluids. There's some dehydration there. And I looked at Sarah, I'm going, what do you think about that? And she's like, well, they get the cannula into you for fluids, and then it's a very easy entry point for that, for them to pop some scent in there. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll just drink more. But, it was really that as much support as there was there from the midwife, then having Sarah there as that kind of voice of reason that wasn't having to deal with the obstetricians really did take on that midwifing role. And I remember chatting to the midwife about it a couple of days after Leo was born. And I said, as the birthing mother in that time, I felt guilty about saying no to their recommendations coming from upstairs to the midwives. So, it's coming from the obstetricians to the midwives to me. And I was saying, these things don't feel right for me, or they're not the direction that I want to take. And there was no signs of distress or anything like that going on. So what I was carrying through that period of labour was a sense of guilt about telling the midwives no, knowing that they had to then report that back to the obstetricians. And the midwife with a lot of humour, said to me, "That's fine. We just go back to the obstetricians and tell them we've got an uncompliant patient," which she was being very, very humorous, and I appreciated it. But there was that sense, the birthing person having to kind of keep the peace nearly. And ideally, that's not what's happening for us to get into that ventral vagal state and being able for our bodies to do what needs to be done. But the reality was that even in that setting of essentially, which was there to support a physiological birth, even within that setting of it being completely midwife led, there was still that element of feeling like those aspects had to be navigated. And having Sarah there in her role as a doula was incredibly important for me to get that outcome of a physiological birth that I'm not sure would have gone that way without her there and her advocation, just given the other dynamics that were at play.
So everything you've just spoken to there is the reason why I want to have these conversations and why I'm about to do what I'm going to do in Core and Floor Restore, which is open the Modern Birth Workers Village. So you kind of like skip to that. You've given the example for the last step, and I'm going to talk to it briefly and then come back, because through hearing so many people's birth stories and being able to widen my lens and see what's actually happening, there are so many layers to your story. And so for me, I've really sat with over the last few years, how do we address this? Because ultimately, who we are here for are the families. So how do we get to the point where what we're doing as maternity care providers feels more safe for those in our care? And this is where the oppression, the aggression, the exclusion, that is all coexisting at the moment, and it's quite loud in maternity. It's very loud. How does that feel for those in our care? So what does it feel like when we have midwifery versus obstetrics? Quite often, it feels like mummy and daddy are fighting. And so that guilt that you felt was what I call awoken trauma. It's what I label as awoken trauma, which is our patterning playing out. So that guilt you felt is deeply connected to many stories in your past of how you felt in hierarchy.
Yep.
So not just with our mother and father, but our mother and father, or our mothers or our fathers, whatever family dynamic we're in, they are our first sense of hierarchy. And then the school system, sports systems, professional spaces add depth to that. And so much of what I see in the birth processing space, birth debriefing, whatever you want to call it, is these patterns play out. And they deeply impact our nervous system state and therefore have a direct impact on whether physiological birth occurs or not, and also how we enter parenthood and how things feel in our system. So understanding that trauma stems from incomplete processes, incomplete physiological processes, and incomplete homeostasis. And so that is why the pattern exists in you in the first place, to have that guilt. And then why it plays out in that environment. So there's so many layers to this. There's you as a person that we meet with and can bring, and you have the conscious awareness. So we can work with you and we can work with those of us that work in the system. And so that's what the Modern Birth Workers Village is really about, is starting to work at that level, because I've been working with people for many years now, nearly 20, And I've had a very privileged career that has enabled me to see so many of these parts that I can now start to bring it all together. But what our maternity care currently feels like a lot of the time is that mummy and daddy are fighting.
Yeah.
So how does that feel for us as consumers accessing the service? And then the other analogy that I often use is because through our attempts to be seen from the oppression that we've had, we often swing to the other side of the pendulum and we have aggression. Now, to understand aggression, we have to understand feelings a little bit more. There is a lot to be angry about. And when I say that, the sadness is there because we understand that, mad is often sad's bodyguard. So there is a lot to be sad about. Many of us are stuck in that anger, and I was for a very long time, most of my career, stuck in that anger. Many of us need to feel that anger and have the space for it to then be able to move into the sadness as well. And many people listening to this and many midwives may not identify with that at all. And that may be because it doesn't exist for them, but I would say more often than not it's because there isn't the safety to have the conscious awareness that it's there, right?
Yeah.
Because we need to have the capacity to have the awareness and the consciousness. And then often we get the awareness and we go, I wish I didn't have this because this doesn't feel that great. And it was nice to be blissfully unaware. But that anger is really valid. But where is the right place for it? And I know I talked about not having right or wrong, but where is a more appropriate place for it? And right now in the maternity care system, everyone is just getting louder and louder and shouting over each other. And we've lost sight of what it's all about, which is actually those in our care and their experience of the care. And I want to say we've lost sight. That's probably really unfair to say that because that's our intention. So it's not that we've lost sight of it. It's that we don't yet possess the skills to meet with this in a way that is going to lead to sustainable change. And systemic change, true systemic change, requires emotional intelligence. And it requires a deep understanding of your own nervous system, your own triggers. It requires effective communication tools and the ability to have conversation with others and connection with others and connection with those that we may not agree with, but that we can start to have an interconnectedness with. So with maternity, I'm going to finish this just for a second.
Yeah.
With maternity care feeling like mummy and daddy fighting, if we come back to that aggression and we can think about what it's like in relationships when mummy and daddy are fighting, more often than not, they're trying to yell over each other. And what happens is we don't ever turn to see each other. We don't see ourselves in it and we don't see the other person. And I love anger. Anger is an incredible feeling. It shows us where our boundaries have been crossed and where injustices are. And that's why when I say the anger that is here is valid, it really is. There's been a lot of boundaries that have been crossed and there are a lot of injustices at the moment, not just in the maternity care system, in many systems. And I really think that's what our children, especially those of us that have truth tellers as children, are really trying to highlight. They're trying to highlight the systemic change that needs to happen. And we are in for a few decades where we're really going to be forced to meet with this, which is why I see what we're doing in this podcast and in the work that we're doing and that others are doing is so needed. Why anger often gets entangled with violence, and that is aggression. And that is why the majority of our society fears anger. But anger can be as powerful and as beautiful as love when it's given the best space for it to be processed and felt and met with. And for me, I want to bring awareness that publicly it's not the place for it, because that is felt by the majority of that is felt by those in our care. And so what ends up happening is we start excluding ourselves and others. And so what I really see maternity care as at the moment is a whole bunch of islands scattered in the ocean. Now, what does it feel like as a family, as a woman or a birthing person and a family trying to access care when you've got a bunch of scattered islands everywhere? You're constantly swimming, trying to find the island in the first place. And then when you're on it, you're trying to see, is there another one? Is there something that can come in? And you become the person trying to bring the islands together, right? Like you become the little child trying to bring mummy and daddy together so that you can then be safe.
Yeah.
And really what I would love for those of us that work in maternity care is to understand that we're all part of the same system. Whether you're in free birth, private obstetrics, public maternity, private midwifery, we are all offering maternity care. And so actually, rather than separated islands, what would it feel like? Imagine what it would feel like for those in our care if we came together like a really grounded tree. And we're all these different branches. And yeah, I might want to walk on that branch because that branch feels a lot safer for me. And that branch is something I don't even want to look at, but it's still there and it's connected. And I feel the interconnectedness and inclusion brings safety. It brings safety to all of us. It doesn't mean that we would thrive on that branch. We're not on that branch professionally or personally, but it's still there and we have an awareness and an acknowledgement of it without making it wrong or right. We're in the moment, in the truth, in the acceptance of it. And I can tell you, I was an island for a really long time, and I was an island within islands. So as a student, I was an island. When I went in, we started talking about what was it like to be a Bachelor of Midwifery student. I went in on my first day of placement and they looked at me and said, "What do you mean you don't know how to take a blood pressure? Sit in the corner and watch." I was sat in the corner. And this is another issue. Midwives tend to eat their young. And I remember as a student saying to a midwife, "Why are you treating me like this? I'm about to become your colleague. Why are you treating me like this? Don't you want to nurture me and nourish me so that I can stand alongside you and support you and you can trust me and I can trust you? Why are you excluding me like this?" And most of my student years were spent in the pan room bawling my eyes out as an island, because I was taught by these incredible midwives who did home birth and believed in home birth and believed in physiology. And then we were thrown into the system where physiology was hardly seen. And they would own that. They would say, "Yeah, it's really hard." But that was it. There wasn't, and there still isn't, and this is what the Modern Birth Workers Village is going to really be about, is learning the tools that we actually need to be able to not just survive, but thrive and feel safe in the system, whether you want to instill change or not. My first priority with the Modern Birth Workers Village is to look after the midwives, the doulas, the obstetricians we have now, to hold you so you can keep holding others in a way that feels better for them, right? It's that beautiful river and flow on effect.
Of the islands and someone, swimming between the islands trying to find their direction. And wouldn't it be lovely if everyone on their own individual islands could throw out a safety net for this person to kind of help support them, and then this person has this connection to all of these different their islands with a full sense of safety that they can walk any of those in any direction that feels good for them. But there's a communication and there's a connectedness between each of these individuals that might be part of their team care as well.
Yeah, and that's, there are systems, and so often this, and I'm going to talk about this as well. But there are places that do this and people that do this really well, right? I really want to highlight that. There are individual care providers and there are systems out there that do it exceptionally. And I have been a part of them as well. But, I know as a student, I felt like an island. And some of you are going to be listening to this being like, I'm an island. And you'll see your own island. And when I've presented this in workshops, you see everyone just being like, oh, I'm an island. And this isn't about blame or shame. It's just being seen, right? Of like, yeah, that's where I'm at. And again, it's not wrong, but what is true in this moment? And some of you might not feel that that's true, and that's okay too. But, and then I went into from my direct entry midwifery degree, I moved straight to Darwin, and a lot of the roles I've held have been in midwifery group practice. And even in that, you feel like an island within midwifery. And then people that aren't in midwifery group practice, there's an island in that. And I've felt that. So when I moved to Melbourne, before I started in the midwifery group practice, I was made to do 6 weeks on the ward. And I loved it. I loved being part of that team, but I could feel the pull to the midwifery group practice because they were my people. That was the way I wanted to work. But I felt this connection in the core team. And then as soon as I went into the midwifery group practice, I became an island again. I was separated from them and we became different. And the women in our care felt that. They felt the difference when you had your MGP midwives in there as opposed to when the team leader came in. It's that felt sense
Can I
that
ask
can shift everything.
What was your, earlier you mentioned about, before kind of getting into midwifery that you had this my mum had cesarean, so I'll just have cesareans. Like, why would we not birth? And then you went into midwifery, not really understanding, I guess, kind of what that meant to be a midwife. But somewhere along the line, it became like, oh, these people in midwifery group practice, they're my people. But where was that moment for you that kind of shifted from I'm going to, we'll just have cesareans. Why wouldn't we just do that? To, physiological birth is my passion. What was the moment? Was there a moment or was it a gradual transition to, changing that feeling within you?
I think they were pronoia moments that I wasn't conscious of at the time. I really feel like the universe just took control of and guided me into midwifery. So even, once I'd sat the GAMSAT and decided it wasn't what I wanted to do, the way I got into midwifery was literally flicking the UAC book, which was the guide to university degrees, being like, I can't do medicine. I can't do 13 years. What am I going to do? And I literally flicked it and it opened on the page of midwifery. And I was like, the hell is that? And then I was like, oh, that's the same as obstetrics. That's exactly what I want to do. I'm going to do that. So if we talk about pronoia moment, of all the pages, of all the degrees, it flipped open onto that. And then, so my first degree was sports psychology. So I loved understanding physiology and the mind. I loved that. So, and I had this amazing PE teacher who had told us this story about how Kathy Freeman wanted to run the 100-meter race in 10 seconds, but she'd accidentally written 9 seconds on a piece of paper and she looked at it. And so I was like, well, I'm going to do that for my HSC. So I wrote 96.45 on a piece of paper and I stuck it up on my corkboard and I looked at it every single day I studied. And then I opened up my my results because they came in the post back then and I got 96.65 and I thought someone was messing with me, right? And then my brother, shout out to my brother, 10 years older sibling there, was like, well, if you're so smart, why didn't you write 100? And he had betted with his colleague that I wasn't going to get that high of a mark, and he lost $100. So he was definitely sitting in his nervous system dysregulation there when he said that comment, but also accurate. Like, yeah, why didn't I write 100? But I'd had this beautiful guidance and this love of physiology and psychology coming together. And so then in, semester 1 of university, Hannah Darlin is standing up there and starts talking about physiological birth, and it just made sense to every cell of my being. Like, I was just like, oh my goodness. Like, and, it just made sense. So yeah, it was a moment. It was Hannah. It was really Hannah and Shaker Police together. They taught this subject together, and they had been private midwives at the time, and they were doing home birth. And I was like, that makes sense. And then if I think about everything that I've done and all that I bring, that I've always trusted physiology. And the way I now look at trauma and understand trauma, it's the trust in physiology. Our bodies are the greatest machines that have ever been created. And it's not just a trust in physiology, it's a trust in wisdom, because the body's wisdom doesn't always lead to function, especially the function that we want and the function that we assume or desire, but it's trusting that. And so, yeah, it was Hannah. I owe so much of how I'm able to see things in that aspect to her.
Yeah.
And then I had other great leaders as well. That course, if I had done it somewhere else with other people, I wouldn't be who I am today. But it was at UTS, and it was just phenomenal. It was in Australia at the time, it was I think it was it was the first offering Bachelor of Mid. And so what happened after that was that I then moved to Darwin and quickly became the vice president of the Australian College of Midwives Northern Territory branch, and then became the president. And this was during the time where there was a whole lot. Hannah Darlin was the president. There was a vote of no confidence. There was so much happening within midwifery that was creating more and more islands within midwifery. And this is one of our biggest issues, is that medicine doesn't have. In medicine, they stick up for each other. They come together regardless. In midwifery, we're like hens. We peck each other down, and it's got to stop. Yeah. It's really got to stop, and it's got to stop and the way it's going to stop is by having more emotional intelligence and understanding of ourselves and others. But it is this pecking order that happens. And so at the time, the turmoil was around national registration and home birth becoming illegal because we didn't have insurance. And so I was I was a new grad and was the president. And that's how the Northern Territory works. You just need a first name and you need to turn up to something and you get a role. So I had this phenomenal career progression where I was really mentored by the best of the best. So Krusky, Carolyn Homer, they were all there. And I then went from the president to the board of directors within months. So I was the youngest ever board of director for the Australian College of Midwives, and they took me under their wing, and I got so many opportunities in those first years of midwifery, and I made so many mistakes. I was called stupid by in a meeting by the chief nurse and midwife of Australia. I'm pretty sure it was her at the time, because of the way I was just so passionate and the way I was turning up, and just my lack of effective communication. But I was just, I'm a truth teller too. They're my autistic tendencies of just, just speaking what is there and speaking to the injustice. And I don't play games. And I remember the head of ACM at the time being like, you've got to learn to play the game. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm never going to play the game. I don't want to play the game. And so, yeah, that was, all of that was happening in those first 5 years of my career. And I was traveling Australia and going to conferences. And really my goal was to become a professor and to be the president of the whole Australian College of Midwives and really have that academic career. And so simultaneously, I published my honours, and I completed my master's in public health as well. And have enrolled in multiple PhDs. So I went to the Solomon Islands for a year to volunteer as a midwife. So I've worked in that international aid. So long story that I'll come back to of why I never got to Ethiopia, but I did actually get a job in Ethiopia. It was a 2-year position as a midwifery professor in Ethiopia. And 1 month before my wedding, my husband said to me, I can't go. Now, I have a tattoo that's Amharic, which is the predominant language in Ethiopia. It's my only tattoo. The first day he met me, he knew that it was my plan to go to Ethiopia and be a midwife. And then 1 month before my wedding, he called it. Now, I can now see that as a beautiful pronoia moment, but at the time, it rocked me.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It was like, and the reason we ended up in the Solomon Islands is because of him. He didn't want to go to live in a city of 90 million people. And I can tell you right now, our relationship probably wouldn't have survived that. And I don't think it would have been what I wanted. Like I really trust that redirection and what I got out of the Solomons. It was the best year of my life. It was one of the best years of our lives. And I learned so much of it that also ties in to who I am and why I'm able to see things in the way I do now. And I'm going to talk about that in the next episode, especially around trust, because I have worked in midwifery where we have nothing, not even a Doppler. And I've worked in big city hospitals and I've seen birth in all of those parts. Oh, my puppy is getting really connected. And so, yeah, we're going to have to wrap this up here. But I might just wrap it up there on that beautiful pronoia moment of not being in Ethiopia and being in the Solomons and then coming back from the Solomons. And I was meant to do my PhD. That was the plan. And my husband was meant to work and he couldn't find work. And I found this MGP role. And again, it was another pronoia moment that really shifted everything and has led me to where we are today. So we're going to pause, keep you hanging, and come back and
such
continue.
an interesting conversation with so many elements and so much depth that I think it's going to take us a few episodes to cover even
basically
a small percentage of what it deserves.
Yeah. And so I will say, I will do a plug. The Modern Birth Workers Village is open. It's a year-long container to really start to have the conversations, gain the knowledge, and be immersed in a collective of people that want to learn about themselves, and about what we can do to really support the nervous systems of those that we're caring for and those that we are working with, but more importantly, how we can support ourselves. So the main priority is to nurture our current workforce and to reduce that burnout rate that is there, to work with I never get this word right, visceral trauma, vicarious
Yes.
trauma.
Yes.
And that's my deafness always plays into
Just
how I pronounce things.
Yep.
I make things up. Vicarious trauma, and also what we can do to decrease the birth trauma rate. So it'll be a closed container. There's limited spaces. I've made it super cheap. It's $330 for the year, $165 for students. Doulas, midwives, and obstetricians can be in it. And so much of what we do can be anonymous because the maternity is a small world. So the case studies that I present and that others might want to present, so you might want to bring a situation to be worked on, it can all be anonymous. So I really see that this is my biggest medicine to the world right now, and we're going to continue talking about why and how in the next episodes. But the close, I think it's the 25th of May, the village will close for sign-ups for the year. So jump on, grab a spot before places fill up. Tell your friends about it. Get your colleagues in on it, because, we don't want you to just join and be an island in it. We want you to be able to bring some others in with you. So if multiple people in your workplace are doing it together, then you're going to be able to have more of that branching effect, like a tree, or the safety net, whichever analogy lands for you. So we'll pop a link in the show notes around that. Please tell people about it if that feels right for you. And let's continue this conversation in the next episode.
And happy International Midwives Day to all you wonderful midwives out there, from a birthing mama and a health professional. Thank you.
Thank you for all that you do. Big love.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope this episode has inspired you to connect to your own pronoia moments and perhaps even share them with the people you love. Before we go, if anything that came up in today's conversation felt big for you, we see you. We invite you to take care of yourself, find something that resources you, and if you need more support, please reach out to a healthcare professional or support service. Your nervous system deserves to be held. Core and Floor Restore has a multidisciplinary team offering online sessions, and they would love to be part of that support for you. But there are so many incredible people out there too, so find what feels right for you. If you'd like to connect with us further, you can find me, Jess, at jessweatherallosteopath.com.au and B at coreandfloor.com.au. We hope you'll join us again.